me a minute. All right. So thank you very much, everybody, for having joined, and especially Ghazala Wahab. Ghazala, as all of you know, is one of our most eminent defense journalists, and that's how she's known. That's her professional calling card. But over the last 3 years or so, Ghazala has been much in demand for being somebody who has an acute and an insightful view on Muslim issues. Thanks largely to her really wonderful best-selling book, Born a Muslim. Since then, we've been approaching Ghazala to help us and to write for us on a number of issues. And one of those that all of us were very worried about a year ago was this whole issue on the hijab controversy. And what was the hijab issue? Why did it become such a nightmare for some people who were defending it? What were they defending when they were defending hijab? What has been the Muslim stance on this, the secular stance on this, and the official stance on this? So it became a very complicated, unnecessary complicated issue, and a very bipartisan, a very bipolar thing that brought out, possibly the worst among people who you wouldn't accuse bigotry for, which is teachers, principals, students, classmates, and it presented a really ugly picture of modern India in one of our most progressive states. The ironies were stark, and they were pretty grim when it happened. Thankfully, it disappeared from the scene almost as soon as it began, but it left a very bad and a scar on all of us. And therefore, it was wonderful to have somebody like Ghazala take a view on that, take a look on that, and dissect it for us. It did and remains a challenge for the Muslim population in India, particularly young women. So in this series where we are discussing challenges beyond just the citizenship challenge, this forms an important chapter. And it's really wonderful for that Ghazala accepted our invitation to talk about it today. So Ghazala, over to you. Give us your talk, and then we will have some discussion. You'll see that Dr. L.C. Saxena, Shriram, Dr. Mistry, all are here. So may we begin?
Yeah, thank you so much, Amir, and thank you again for always plumbing for me. You have done a wonderful job of promoting the book, which otherwise wouldn't have reached so many people as it has done now. So thank you once again. I was actually taken aback by the hijab controversy when it erupted, because I felt that this was a non-issue, both from the Muslims' point of view as well as from the non-Muslim point of view. So how it happened was completely baffling. The only reason I can think of was desperation, political desperation because of the government in power at that point. And they thought that maybe this would help get them some traction at the hustings. So that was the only reason I can think of. But going beyond that, expanding the subject a little bit more, my own exposure to Islam was very, I would say, it had put me on a path which made me question Islam as a religion itself. Because when I first, as a child, I used to question my mother on various things about what Islam says about women. And most of the time, I found that my mother didn't have answers to that. So I was handed a translation, a very probably one of the bad translations of Quran. And the first chapter I read was Nisa. And the thing that stuck with me was that a man has a right to hit the woman. And that really, really troubled me. So when I asked my mother, how can any religion sanction this kind of abuse, physical abuse of a woman, she had no answer, because she had not really uh, understood the Quran in the spirit it was revealed, and in the spirit it expected people to accept or understand it. Uh, Subsequently, I asked her about things like 72 hoods in paradise. I said, what will women get? So for a long time, she kept deferring my question. And then she said, well, women will become whores. So I said, so here on earth, you are actually humoring men. And when you go to paradise, you will transform into whores, and again, you will be humoring men. So what do you get out of being a devout Muslim? And again, she had no answers. So my initiation into my religion as a woman was very upsetting. And burqa, parda, hijab, whatever you call it, was one of the reasons which I thought was a negative factor about Islam, which is why Islam could never be a modern, progressive religion. It was a primitive, medieval religion. Until I started researching for my book, Born a Muslim, and then I realized that actually Islam is a feminist religion. And the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, was a feminist. Everything about Islam empowers women. It's just too unfortunate that most women are like like my mother. They do not understand Islam in the spirit it was revealed. I mean, the first Muslim was a woman, and the first person who protected the fledgling Muslim community was a woman. So it was a power of a woman, her power, her agency, her financial resources, her capability to run a successful business, her capability to decide who she wants to marry. All of that contributed to the growth of Islam. And clearly, there was no parda, there was no hijab then. So I was completely astounded when I realized that this is one religion which empowers women like no other religion does. And yet, we associate so many dogmatic things with the faith. We associate so many things which seem to put women in a straitjacket, in a predefined role. So I thought this is the biggest injustice we do to our religion. So when this hijab controversy emerged in Karnataka, my biggest grudge or my biggest grievance was against the Muslims who defended hijab in the manner in which it should not have been defended, by saying that this is essential to your religion. And if you do not wear a hijab, or if you do not appear in a particular way in public, you will be less of a Muslim. All of this bothered me. All of this troubled me. So when the controversy first came up, I was holding my horses. I did not speak too much. I did not voice my opinion, because I thought there was so much of politics involved. So maybe I should not get engaged in this issue, because I could see how politics was playing up. But when it went out of control, I realized that the only people who will suffer from this would be the Muslim women. Now, there are statistics which show that so many Muslim girls dropped out of a formal education because of the controversy, because their parents also dug their heels in, because the universities, the colleges dug their heels in. And things may change now because the government has changed. But the problem was that whichever side you took, the victims were always the women. My only problem with this whole controversy was that you were playing politics, and both sides were playing politics on the shoulders of women, without realizing that the people who need maximum hand holding in the community, whether it's education, whether it's employment, whether it's even position of control in a household, the women are the most vulnerable. But despite all this, if you were putting them on the slaughter board, then there was something wrong with you, and there was something wrong with your politics. And that is all I said, and I have maintained that whether you wear a hijab or you don't wear a hijab, whether you think it's an essential religious practice or you don't think, whether it's your family practice, whether it's a compulsion, whether it's a choice, irrespective of all of that, the fact is that when you dig your heels from a position of weakness, you only make yourself even more vulnerable. And I think this whole hijab issue, the way it played out, the way it has panned out now, has only victimized Muslim women even more. And that is all I have to say. I don't know if anybody's there.
Hi. Sorry, I think it is that same virus or whatever software.
Were you able to hear?
Yeah, I heard you absolutely fine. I'll bring in Dr. First, and then I will get to Jihad.
Thank you very much, Amir. I enjoyed listening to Ghazala, and I've also read her book, which I think one of the best books on the subject that has been written so far. The whole issue is that, the hijab controversy has helped BJP in polarizing, and it may have helped BJP also in vote terms of more Hindu votes, and it has harmed Muslim women. So therefore, my question is that there has been so much of injustice against Muslims in the last 10 years, 9 years. Also, polarization or prejudice has been converted by the BJP into hatred. Unfortunately, a very large number of educated people and my own friends in the IAS have become strong supporters of BJP, which is very unfortunate that they don't see how much injustice has been done to Muslims and also to women. But the question I want to ask is, it is one thing to do analysis. It is one thing to condemn BJP. It is one thing to see how injustice has been done against them. But what is the solution? And who has the solution? What is it that we need to do in order to reduce prejudice against Muslims? And this prejudice is not something which has been created by BJP. Even in the 60s and 70s and 80s, if you look at the Commission of Inquiry reports and riots, you find how the police and administration has treated Muslims very, as if they are not human beings. Whether you read the Meerut report or Malyana report, Bhagalpur, etc. Now, I have still not understood. After all, prejudice doesn't exist, is not something which is only in India. prejudice is there against the blacks in the US or against uh, Jews in Germany. I'm sure academics and researchers and sociologists must have analyzed the reasons for this prejudice and must have suggested what needs to be done. But unfortunately, although I've read a large number of articles and books on the subject, I've still not found any one suggesting solutions. And who has those solutions? If when you have BJP in power, surely BJP is not going to reduce polarization, it will not reduce prejudice or hatred against Muslims because it helps them electorally. So, who are the other actors who can reduce that prejudice against the minority community? And what is it that the Muslims themselves can do in order to improve their acceptability in the Hindu mind? So, that is what I wanted to know. And if there is any good article or any book on this subject, I would certainly like to read. Because my own analysis shows that the more society gets polarized, the more harm would be done to Muslims. So polarization or even fighting for their own rights leads to it's like hitting at your own self. So I'm very confused about this issue as to what is it can be done and who can do that in order to bring the two communities together.
Thank you so much for this question. Actually, we make a mistake when we think about our present moment only in terms of BJP and only in terms of 2014. This process of introducing prejudice against the Muslims started in the early decade, the first decade of the 20th century. And if you just look back, if you take a broad overview of where the roots of this prejudice lies, you'll realize that this was not just a Hindutva project. This was a project of the Crusades, which has been there because when this series of battles started between the Muslims and the Christians, the victors decided what the history would be. So this prejudice came from there. And all along the early part of the 20th century, there were rebellions against the British Empire and also the other European colonies in parts of Africa, North Africa, most of which were the Muslim communities. So it helped them to vilify the Muslim community, to degrade them as less than human beings, because it would then justify brutal violence against them to suppress those uprisings. If you read the history of the late 19th century and the early 20th century of the world, you would see how terrible these rebellions were in the North African colonies and the Middle Eastern colonies, and how brutal the repression was from the colonizers. So this mindset was transposed into India, which was also a colony. And when the British were trying to figure out the Indian society, they could not understand the diversity of the Indian society. They wanted to put everything in a straitjacket so that they and their bureaucrats could understand by just reading a few, what in the military is called SOP, Standard Operating Procedures. So they just wanted very clear-cut SOPs about the Indian society. So this is a Muslim community, they've come from outside. This is a Hindu community. They've always been the Indians, native Indians. Within the Hindu society, these are untouchables. So if you see even the early laws which the British India had promulgated in India, it legalized or it institutionalized the inherent prejudices in India. So the prejudice was not only against the Muslims, there was deep prejudice against the tribal, who were regarded as the Adivasis and then subsequently changed into Vanvasis, because Adivasi would mean that they were the oldest citizens of the country. The huge prejudice against the Dalits, so much so that the British laws actually allowed, prevalence of practices such as that Dalit women could not cover their breasts. They had to appear in public with their breast exposed. So they actually institutionalized and put them in books, which subsequent Indians were reading, that these are the methods in which this country has to be governed. So we inherited these prejudices. We inherited the prejudice that Muslims are outsiders. We inherited the prejudice that, oh, they cannot be trusted because they are never loyal. They're always rebelling against the rulers. So the point is, there is nothing that Muslims in India can do to close this gap of polarization, which is being widened every day. The only people who can work towards this are the Hindus, who are getting polarized, who are getting affected by this kind of a propaganda. So when somebody says, what can Muslims do for greater acceptability? I think there's nothing that Muslims can do. Muslims have done everything that they could do to be accepted as citizens. And actually, there's no need. I mean, they are citizens of the country. It is not just a question of that they have been in India for so many years. Forget about how many years they've been here. There are Indian citizens for as long as we go back. And if we see the recent research of the last 2 or 3 years on genetics, then there's nobody who's the original citizen of any country. Everybody has come from outside. Everybody has come from a single lineage. So apparently there was one African lady and one African man. The entire mankind has come from that. So there is no question of who this nation belongs to more. It belongs to everybody who stays here, who lives here, who works here, and who is ready to die here, who's not migrating for better economic opportunities outside. So it belongs to everybody. So this gap, which has been deliberately created in the last 9 years by the BJP, it did not start in 2014. It started in the early decade of 20th century when Mr. Savarkar, who is now our new icon, he decided that the country only belongs to those whose Pitra Bhumi and Punya Bhumi this is. Now, when you categorize a nation like that, you automatically create a category of somebody who's superior than other. So it's not just India. Any nation cannot really go forward if it puts a huge category of its own people as inferior. It's not just the Muslims, it's everybody else that the upper caste Hindus deem as less than them. So I think our problem is much greater. Of course, Muslims are facing a huge amount of violence and physical threat to their lives and livelihood. But the fact is that if there were no Muslims, other Hindus or the low caste Hindus or Hindus who are out of the pale of caste system, they would be facing this violence. So it's just a question of who you are targeting at that particular point. I was reading the National Crime Bureau's report for last year. Crimes against Dalits have gone up by 65%. This is a disturbing figure. Of course, Muslims are very, very vulnerable, but look at the other figure. It's hugely disturbing. So if this is a society we are building for ourselves, if this is the way we expect to go forward, then I'm really sorry to say there's not much distance we can cover. You see the inauguration of the parliament, and somebody had posted 2 pictures, a picture from Jawaharlal Nehru's time and the picture from now. And you see the difference. The present parliament was inaugurated in the company of only saints, holy people, religious people. No, nobody else. So actually, instead of going forward, we are regressing. And the biggest victim of this regression, I think, are Hindus. You can kill the Muslims, you can get rid of all the Muslims, you can get rid of all the tribal, of all the Dalits, but whoever remains here would not be a forward-thinking person. That person would be constantly looking back at the religious gurus and asking for advice for the future. That's not the way any country in present times should aspire to go forward.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ghazala. May I get the others in? Hem Borkar has joined, and Praveen is here. Heather bhai, if you have anything. Oh, actually, I must first go to Dr. Mistry. Dr. Mistry, thanks for joining. This was, what we had asked Ghazala to do is tell us quickly about the paper that she had written on the hijab issue, and that's what she was presenting. So I would like to bring in any one of you who wants to say something, comment, question. Rita, you've been listening.
Sorry, I'm out in the market, so there's going to be a lot of background noise.
Doesn't matter. Yeah.
So, it is not just Muslim women, but what I see happening is this whole BJP thing, or the ruling party right now, has somehow dismantled what is called sensibility and coexistence. It's cutting at the root of what is called civility and scientific temper. Like today, I just saw that they've taken away the periodic table from the school, this thing, and Darwin's theory, and then citizenship and all of that from the school syllabus. So, it unfortunately has started with the Muslims, but I don't see any other community in this country being left alone. I'm scared. I'm scared for the daughters, I'm scared for the kids, I'm scared for our society as a whole.
Yeah. Ghazala, I just want to bring in another issue, which is this whole this entire din over what is known as love jihad. Do you see that as a serious issue? There does seem to be a perceptible tension around that these Muslim boys, they take away our girls. And who cares for the numbers? But is that an issue?
Everything is a very big issue if it's raised at the level of the government. Now, we laugh about love jihad, we say it's nonsense. But the truth is, there are so many states who have passed draconian anti-conversion laws. Some of the states actually talk about life imprisonment for a person who is accused of forceful conversion. So it's a serious issue. Now, the problem is not just the law. The problem is that this law puts the burden of proving that no conversion took place on the victim. Now, what happens in India, if you are in love and you want to marry somebody, it's not just India, world over. You're not thinking in terms of what your religion is, because that whole sentiment of being in love is so strong that at that point you just want to do whatever it takes to marry the person you love. So you can convert. I know a lot of Muslims who have converted to Hinduism and Arya Samaj mandirs, because that was the easiest way they found of marrying the person. I have myself undergone Shuddhikaran in a Arya Samaj mandir, because I was I went along with a Muslim person as his sister, because he wanted to marry a Hindu woman, and that the only easiest way they found was to get married in Arya Samaj mandir. So this person converted, and as his sister, Muboli Behen, I had to convert too. So this proper Shuddhikaran ceremony happened with me also. Now, does it mean anything to me? It doesn't. But it was important to get that ceremony done. Now, if somebody from the Muslim community wants to get after me they can get after me that what nonsense have you done. So people do a lot of things because of their emotions, because of their sentiments, and these things should not matter in a civilized society. Ultimately, it's two people who are getting married. But now when you bring law into this, when the states pass these draconian acts, then it's a very serious matter. Because then what happens is a lot of people, they take these shortcuts because our civil law is completely emasculated. You see, SMA, this act is really it's a non-starter, because you inform the parents of the child, both children who wants to get married, and you give them this window in which the parents, the relatives, anybody can object. Who has the time and who can take this risk? Because if you are marrying against the wishes of your parents, then obviously you don't want them to know. But if the law itself informs your parents, and your parents come and bring the entire kunba, entire tribe with them, and catches hold of the woman, takes her away, pressurizes her, beats her up, locks her up, what is she going to do? She is going to obviously say that, look, I was misled by this person. So we are actually, by this law, we have not only taken away individual freedom, we have taken away the rights of citizens which were guaranteed by the Constitution. We are also criminalizing a huge section of our society. We say that our youth is our future, because India's biggest industry is the service industry. We have poor manufacturing, we don't do anything else except provide services, and services are provided by our young people. Now we are criminalizing a huge section of our young people by these stupid, motivated, prejudiced laws. Then obviously we do not think much about what our future capital is. So we are not really bothered about this.
Yeah. Hem Burkar was here in Hyderabad last week, and she was speaking to a number of people in Hyderabad, a number of Muslims, trying to understand what is going in their minds. And, him, I mean, will you like to come in? Did you come across this issue of hijab in your discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I think that hijab came up in a big way. And I think there was, so I think there was some delight about the Karnataka result. From where it, but yeah, I think while I was researching educational institutions, it was in fact twinfold. On one hand, were institutions which were saying that, for fostering excellence in higher education, we should do away with public exhibitionism of any sort. So, let's do away with the hijab, let's do away with the skull cap. Because basically, I was looking at private, non-state, minority educational institutions and how they're fostering sort of professional education, like, UPSC coaching, engineering, medicine, and so on and so forth. So on one hand, there were bodies which were saying that, we are training young boys and girls, and we're telling the girls that this is a private thing, and please don't, you are very welcome to wear what you want to wear while you're praying and so on and so forth, but not in the institutions while studying, because we are training you to join the mainstream. And on the other hand, there were other institutions, for example, like Medina and so on and so forth, and MS and all, which were saying that that how does this matter? How does what you wear come in the way at all of pursuing excellence in professional education at all? And in fact, we have people coming into these spaces because they understand it's safe, and in this way that we're allowed to dress and be and pray the way we want. So, I mean, I saw both sides of the debates, but the debate that I encounter more strongly, I think, in institutions like Jamia is when a lot of Muslim women get up and say that, why is everybody now suddenly supporting the hijab? It is just because you want to ghettoize Muslim women, right? What about the people within the community who are policing women and telling them as young as earlier it was at adolescence, now they're telling small girls that you need to wear the hijab. So I mean, these are all these things which make it very complex, I feel. I don't know, what are your sort of views on that? So it becomes very, very difficult in terms of what to say and what is even a choice.
Hmm.
I think
Yeah.
I've spoken.
Yeah,
I've,
yeah,
I've,
yeah,
I've clapped too many things together.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, Ghazala.
See, she's saying exactly what I have been saying. The problem here in India and the world over is that we have linked hijab to too many things. We have linked it to the religious identity, essential religious practice. We have linked it to choice. We have linked it to feminism. We have linked it to access to education, the right to education. The fact is, these are all very, very different issues. Taking one of them at a time. Now, essential religious practice, this is how it was argued in the court, and it was dismissed because it was found that it was not an essential religious practice. The reason is because the Quran itself is not explicit about what kind of hijab is necessary and what is the degree of covering up a woman needs to do. There is a lack of clarity there. But if you see it in the spirit of the religion itself, it puts women and men at equal terms. So it could not be saying something which invisibilizes women. So that's a very rational argument to make. Because if you see all the verses which addresses human beings directly, they address both men and women. They both said you believing the men and believing women, wherever they are being addressed. So it could not have said something, or it could not have done something which made women an invisible part and a non-performing part of the society, or women where they could be dictated things by men. So that was the spirit of the religion itself. The second part is right to education. It is true the right to education is guaranteed to you under the Constitution, and everybody should have that right. But why should this right then be linked with your religion? The right does not say that certain religious practices will be allowed, certain will not be allowed. Now, in counter to this, a lot of people have said that a lot of Indian schools now openly profess Hindu faith. Hindu prayers, havans are taking place in the schools or colleges. It should not be done. I completely agree. If it's a public institution, there should be no place for religion in that. So if there is a restriction on appearance of a certain kind, there should be a restriction on a practice of a certain kind, because it's a public institution. The other thing that I have heard is that saffron scarves as an equivalent to hijab. Now, my argument in this is that nobody wears a saffron scarf in their daily life. A lot of Muslim women wear hijab, but no Hindu man or a woman wears a saffron a saffron scarf. What they do wear is a sacred thread, which is worn as a consequence of a havan or a puja, or they wear a kada or some kind of other symbols, maybe a Mangal Sutra or whatever. So the equivalent of hijab should be that, not a saffron not a saffron scarf. So that is another thing. And the last thing that I have to say is, education is the right of every individual. So why should it only be incumbent upon the state to ensure that this right is being fulfilled? Why is it not incumbent upon the families to ensure that their children have access to education? Why should families put restriction on their children, saying that only under these conditions can you access education? Only if you wear a hijab, you can access education. So there are so many layers to this argument. Unfortunately, the situation in the country is such today that if you are criticizing the community, the Muslim community, you are seen as further adding to their victimization. But the truth is, there are certain things which need to be questioned, and there's never, ever a good time to question them. Whenever an issue arises, you have to question it. I mean, nobody could have questioned the Muslim fathers' insistence that their daughters should only go out of the house wearing a hijab if the issue had not blown up right now. I mean, 20 years back, there was no issue. Not so many Muslim women were wearing hijab. And not so many families were insisting that small children wear hijab. I saw the video of this girl who has stopped her schools and school examinations, and she had to give up the hijab to take her examination, and her video was all over the place. And she said it was a big decision for her because she had been wearing the hijab since her childhood. Now, in her childhood, how was she exercising her choice? As a kid, you have no choice. You do what your parents tell you to do. So there is conditioning. So we need to distinguish between what are the choices you are exercising and what are the things you are conditioned for. Because if you're conditioned through your life for a certain thing, you really do not know what the choice is.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole issue is so layered that are we talking about choice? Are we talking about religious symbolism? Are we talking about identities? To me, it's a very simple matter of a choice that everybody has, and that's it. I mean, there is nothing more to it that one goes in or tries to justify that it's a religious symbol and it is good and it is bad and desirable. It is just about a democracy allowing people to wear or not wear what they want. But but yeah, it became an issue of my religion versus yours and so on. We just have a minute or two to wrap this up. If there is any other comment that any one of the others may have.
I just wanted to add
Sir, yes,
one small point here.
Yes, sir.
The practice of wearing hijab, according to me, has increased over the last 30, 40 years.
Absolutely.
I was district magistrate Aligarh, and I used to go to, my wife and I were often invited to Abdullah Girls College.
Yes.
I hardly saw any girl student wearing a hijab. But if you go today, you'll find at least 50-60% or 30-40% women would be wearing hijab. So therefore, it is not something which is traditional or which has been practiced over the last 100 years. It is something very recent.
Yeah.
And I recall what Gopal Krishna had written some 30-40 years back, that Muslims as a community need anonymity so that there's no prejudice or bias against them. But they are trying to highlight their identity, which comes in their own way. So therefore, in a way, what happens is, as Ali Muhammad Khusro, who was our vice chancellor in Aligarh, he said in a talk that equal bias does unequal harm. And the harm done to Muslim community is immense. Yeah. So therefore, unless we look at our own interest in a rational manner, Muslims will keep on harming themselves in a way by trying to highlight their identity. This is what I feel.
Absolutely, and it's a very ironical and quite inexplicable, or maybe some anthropological answer could come in by way of telling us how when we were growing up, I mean, it wasn't about hijab and it wasn't about temple visits and mosque visits. And even if someone did it, one did it very quietly without telling anybody that, now it's a matter, now you wear it as a badge that,
I feel assertion of identity is a recent phenomena, and it is not limited to Muslims alone. I think all communities in India these days are asserting their identities. I grew up in a largely, after a certain age, I grew up in a largely Hindu locality. I went to a school where I had no Muslim person in my class for a longest period of time. So I could never ascertain a person's identity at that point. But in the last 20 years or so, I have realized that people have become really very particular about their identity, not just the religious identity, their caste identity. So this assertion of identity and local and identity related to your geography, this has become really very, very prominent. I live in the NCR, Delhi NCR, and there's a strong Western UP identity, Eastern UP identity, a strong identity which emanates from Punjabi culture or Haryana culture. Festivals are being celebrated in that particular, in the assertion of that particular culture. I had never, I don't know how many of you know, I had never heard of a festival called Tulsa Ka Viva. So there is a Viva marriage ceremony which happens for the Tulsi, the tree. Yeah. I had not heard of this, but now it's a very big deal. It is a huge ceremony which happens and huge congregation which comes out on the streets. I had never heard about a Hanuman Yatra until a few years back, but now there is a Hanuman Yatra. So I think this allegation that Muslims are asserting their identity is not correct. They are asserting their identity, all right. But why shouldn't they? It's a democracy, and the constitution gives them equal rights. But
Ghazala, just to be mischievous, 15 days ago, nobody had even heard of something called a Sengal. Right?
Yes, of course. No, absolutely. So now you see, and now Sengal is not only a symbol of Tamil pride, but national pride.
Yeah. So yes, that. But as Dr. Saxena said, that's a insightful statement that equal bias actually results in unequal discrimination. So
that's true.
there is that thing about tact and whatever, and it is yes, Shriram. The Middle Eastern thing, clothes, all of that, language. There's so many things that have changed, and they all are either manifestations of changed times or assertions of identity, or as Haim says, it is the minorities making their own space, right? Given that they are constricted otherwise. So it requires a certain kind of maturity to understand that such things do happen in societies that transition, and that they be allowed to without becoming violent or without suppressing those things. Thanks so much, Rana. Thank you so much for this really insightful look into one of our more difficult issues. As we realize, it is a new problem for all of us. And it's a tragedy that a scarf becomes a national problem, and but these are those times that we are living in. We will now break for this week and come back with the next paper next week. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining today, and thanks so much again, Ghazala, for your presentation. On behalf of the USIPI and CDPP, bye.
Bye. Thank you.